Welcome to Rico 12. My name is Justin, and I am a child of an all-powerful and all-loving God and a recovering addict, and am blessed to be the host of this meeting and podcast. Rico 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addictions of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking this path. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to gain tools and hope from others who are walking at this path. Speakers from past meetings have represented so many fellowships and addictions and afflictions, and we look forward to continuing to add to the diversity of speakers and backgrounds. And today, we're continuing to add to that a little bit. Terry has been a previous speaker on meeting number 6, way back in July 2020, when his topic was When Stealing Becomes a Drug. Today, his topic is going to be Bought Out and Spent, Recovery from Compulsive Shopping and Spending. And we're excited to add this to our repertoire. And we'll get to his talk in the Q&A afterwards in just a minute. But first, for a little bit of business. The Rico 12 family of recovery resources continues to grow and have more resources for the addict and the loved ones of those addicted. I invite you to go and listen to and subscribe to the other Rico 12 podcasts that you can find information in the chat of the live meeting, in the show notes. But real quick, Rico 12 Shares, Noodle It Out with Nikki, which is a weekly podcast released on Tuesdays, a deep dive into the big book for solutions to everyday problems. And then we've got the Big Book Roundtable, where we go through line by line the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and do some swimming through there and have some great discussions. All right. Rico 12 we continue to grow, and we continue to do this, and that requires some funding. So on that note, Rico 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. Thank you to all who have donated and continue to donate. This week, a special thanks goes out to Eileen and Marianne, who joined the Spearheads with donations. Those really help in our mission to share this message with others. If you would also like to join the ranks and become a Spearhead and support Rico 12 and our mission, please consider going to www.rico12.com/support and making either a one-time donation or become a monthly Spearhead donor. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'll introduce our guest speaker for today, Terry S. Here's a little bit about him. Terry S. is a 50-year-old Detroit native who has been
58.
Not 58?
58.
Okay,
I thought you said 50. Go ahead.
Yep, a 58-year-old Detroit native who has been in recovery from codependency. I'm trying to make him younger than he is. No, but that's good. And addictive-compulsive shoplifting since 1990. He founded the 12-step group C.A.S.A, which is Cleptomaniacs And Shoplifters Anonymous, in Detroit in 1992. He has been a licensed social worker and certified addictions therapist since 1997, and founded the Shulman Center for Compulsive Theft, Spending, and Hoarding in 2004. Terry has written and published 4 addiction recovery books, and we'll get some information on that so that we can share that in the chat, not in the chat, and in the show notes of the podcast, more likely. And he offers brief, sensitive, and effective therapy programs by phone or video chat. Take it away, Terry. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Justin. And thank you for those of you 11 or 12 people who also seem to be on the call or the video now. And maybe there'll be a few latecomers. You're never late for a meeting. I'm so grateful to be here. From what Justin has told me, I believe Rico 12 has been around for, what is that, Justin, 5+ years?
About 3.5 years almost. Yeah, we're plugging along. Yep.
Like okay. And thank you for having me on a few years ago. So I was talking to Justin again, and he told me that he doesn't recall if anybody has ever come on to talk about compulsive shopping or spending. And while this is not yet recognized as an actual kind of psychological disorder, sometimes it's listed as a symptom of things like bipolar disorder. So a lot of people jump to the conclusion that if somebody is wildly over shopping or overspending, that either they might be in a manic phase, which is sometimes true, but not typically, or that they're just a poor money manager. That might be true, but not always. And my hope is that it does have more research and study to be included as an official psychological disorder, similar to what most people know about with gambling disorder, which has been long recognized as a kind of a potentially addictive compulsive disorder. And even in 2013, about 10 years ago, the DSM-5 book of the whole Bible of psychological disorders kind of even, confirmed that more with gambling. And I'm not saying that everybody with a gambling problem has an actual addiction, but we do know if behaviors can be addictive, not just drugs and alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, food. We do have to slow down and be careful not to call everything an addiction, but it's pretty clear to a lot of the people that I've gotten to know and work with over almost 20 years that something is going on. And my little joke is if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and shops like a duck, it might be a duck. Or, it might be something else. But a lot of times looking at it as an addiction and also looking at recovery as an ongoing path toward monitoring and keeping the overshopping, overspending behavior in check is probably most helpful for most people who generally, by the time they get to me, have had a long-term history of this. So we'll move forward in a minute. I'll make one other thing too. In 2006, I believe was the year, Stanford University did kind of a study that got promoted in the news internationally, trying to theorize that this was a real thing. They called it compulsive buying disorder. And it had a lot of the same elements that you might expect with, almost any addiction, preoccupation, cravings, withdrawal symptoms, negative consequences, layers of denial, layers of secrecy, lying, cheating, and stealing to support the underlying addiction. So again, one day, hopefully that will be more recognized. It kind of is beginning to be more recognized because people know the term shopaholic, shopping addict, and Debtors Anonymous is a group that has been around actually for about 55 years, since 1968. And there should be Debtors Anonymous meetings in just about every state of our union, in Canada, and every country. Of course, they're now partly because of COVID, but not exclusive. There are phone meetings and Zoom meetings. So check that out. I will say now and again later that not everybody with an overshopping or spending problem has debt. So I have heard from some of my clients who've gone to Debtors Anonymous that sometimes, they've always benefited from it, but some of my clients have not had debt. And so sometimes the way the DA program works, from my understanding, I only visited one meeting many years ago when I was writing my first book on shopping and spending addiction. They invited me in. So there is another group called Spenders Anonymous, which is a 12-step group. There's much fewer chapters of that. And then there's also a group that sometimes is helpful for people that's been around since 2005 called Under Earners Anonymous. So some people, it may not necessarily be that they're wildly overspending or overshopping, but for whatever reason or reasons, their income is so low that they're finding themselves getting in debt or struggling with paying the bills and having a lot of stress and anxiety. So Debtors Anonymous, Spenders Anonymous, Over Earners Anonymous. If you didn't know about those groups, Google them, check them out. They might help you or someone you know. So very briefly, how I got interested in this topic, it was kind of a slow roll. I'm a child of divorce. My folks split up when I was about 11 years old. My dad was an overspender. He also was an alcoholic. He also was, untreated bipolar. He was a brilliant man, a child prodigy pianist, and an accomplished attorney. But, none of us is perfect, but he had a lot of kind of demons or addictive issues. And I remember always worrying about money, and he wasn't paying child support after the divorce. And though he died 30 years ago and I made peace with that, he always struggled with money. He had bad credit. And so in the back of my mind, I was always like, I didn't want to be like that. I did develop some of my own addictions that I had to kind of get help with. My mom was a good money manager, and she later would date and marry my stepfather, who was very, very good with money. Not saying frugal or anything, which is not always a bad quality, but so, but as I began to get into my own recovery for compulsive stealing and codependency, and then becoming a therapist about 20 years ago, I kind of first wanted to work as a self-employed therapist, because I did work in the drug and alcohol field for a few years, but I did want to work primarily with stealing. But I noticed a lot of my clients who were stealing, not all of them, but a lot of them were having trouble with money, overshopping, overspending, or a number of them would say things like, and most of my clients have been women, because women still seek help more readily than we guys, but I think that's slowly changing. And there is a stereotype out there. I have to confess, I kind of believed it, except, the stereotype is all women are shopaholics, all shopaholics are women. That's not the case. My dad obviously was a male and had problems with shopping. And in that 2006 Stanford kind of investigation and research, they came to a conclusion that roughly about 6.5% of the, at least, I don't forget if it was the US population or 6.5% of women met the criteria for compulsive buying disorder, and 5.5% of men. And more recently, I think there's been some studies that might put it closer to 10%, which is getting close to the rough percentage of what we think it is for what percentage of the general public will experience problems with alcohol or alcoholism. So just about everybody knows an alcoholic. Many have been an alcoholic or recovering alcoholic, or things like that. So we don't know. We need more research, but I'll use the figure roughly 10% of Americans at some point in their lives will struggle with some episodic and recurring compulsive shopping or spending. And now they're thinking it's closer to 50-50 between men and women. So just keep it. So I've always been interested in some of my stealing clients have had problems with money. What I wanted to say earlier was a common thing, not always, is like, and typically it's a female client who says, my husband was always on me for my spending and I thought it was unfair. So somehow I didn't plan it, but I started to take things to save a little money, or so they wouldn't wind up on the Visa bill for my husband to get upset. And little did I know that I was getting kind of hooked with shoplifting. Another story I hear is I've stopped shoplifting after a period of time for whatever reason, sometimes with intervention, sometimes not, sometimes after an arrest or more, sometimes not. But then they kind of stop shoplifting, but then they start stealing. And then I also work with employee theft, and I've had a number of clients who told me, without making excuses, that they probably had some shopping spending problem and or money management problem, got in over their heads and began to embezzle from the workplace in one shape or form. Very similar to what we hear sometimes with drug addicts, alcoholics, or even gambling addicts, money problems that can lead to stealing. But sometimes people steal first, stop that, but then they start whipping out the plastic and loading up, which one could argue is the lesser of the two evils because it's not necessarily illegal, but I don't think that's what most people want, is just a slightly less horrible addiction. So that's kind of how I got into it, and I've really enjoyed things. I'm a little bit of a money miser myself. I've loosened up over the years. That's partly why I was actually shoplifting, because I always worried about money. My dad was spending and always in debt, and I'm not blaming him, but money is a very complicated issue for most people, and especially for couples. It's probably, from my research over the last couple decades, it's probably number one or number two on the common issues for conflict and breakup among couples. People always say, what's number one? I said, well, it depends on the list you read. But some people say, is it sex and romance? I said, that's in the top two. But you can imagine, and maybe some of you have been through this, if you're arguing about money and debt and hiding things, not always, but typically, your love life and your sex life and your romance life is probably not going to be going too well either. So, so it's something, whether we're single or not, and whether we have children or not, there's something going on. This has always been a problem since the dawn of currency or what have you. But it's safe to say, from my research, it is getting worse. And there's a few different reasons for that without blaming. One is the internet, which really has made it very easy for people to have 24/7, 365-day access to spending money in one way, shape, or form. Just as a quick side note, a lot of addictions have kind of skyrocketed due to the internet. There's internet addiction. There's video game addiction, which has increased. There's sex addiction, love addiction, affairs, hookups, gambling online, workaholism, where people can't put their phone down on the weekend or their laptop. They bring it on the beach when they're on vacation and supposed to be relaxing. So the internet is both friend and foe. And I'm a realist. Most people are not going to unplug from the internet entirely for their personal and or professional lives. But most of my clients over the last 10 years, particularly, with rare exceptions, it's primarily over shopping, overspending through the internet. Most people still do go to stores. I've had a few clients who got hooked on the home shopping networks, QVC, things like that. Sometimes it's a mix, but our relationship with money is very important. And there are many factors that kind of lead to people having this problem. That's what I try to help figure out. I never know the absolute truth with a capital T, but we come up with some decent working theories with a small t with theory. So that's a little bit about that. I'm going to read you the 15 questions from Debtors Anonymous. I did a little editing of them just in case, because like I said, that they all kind of just talk about debt. They really focus in on debt. And true, most people with a shopping spending problem have at least a little bit debt, a medium amount of debt, whatever we call that, or a great degree of debt. And many have filed for bankruptcy at least once or more than once. Some statistics vary real quick about, how much debt does the average American carry, and we call it discretionary debt. So it isn't like, for student loans or medical expenses or, floating a payment if you need to for the car payment or the mortgage. Discretionary spending is kind of, for lack of a better way to describe it, things that aren't necessarily needed, but they're wanted. And some people have no debt and some people have a gazillion dollars of debt. So kind of like the bell curve, but most people carry some debt. The rough average is between $10,000 and $15,000 of discretionary debt on a credit card or more than one credit card. This is American study. It's probably not too different with other countries, but I'm not as familiar with that. Probably we lead the way for better and worse on it. So $10,000 to $15,000 average per person, not even per family. And a lot of times that just gets worse and worse over time, and it becomes very stressful. So, but here's the 15 questions one at a time, and you can think about yourself or someone you love, not that we're taking anyone's inventory, but here's how it goes. So here's the 15 questions of DA. Number one, are your debts, and I'll put or spending, making your home life unhappy? Yes or no? You can think about that for a second here. Number two, does the pressure of your debts or spending distract you from your daily tasks or work? Yes or no? And maybe not right now, but maybe it has in the past, or maybe you're uncertain. Number three, are your debts or spending affecting your reputation? Now, that could be not necessarily online reputation, although sometimes that can get out in the public, but, your reputation among your friends or your family, they're worried about you. Maybe they're talking, hopefully not in a gossipy way, but sometimes that happens too. Are they affecting your reputation in any regard? 4, does your debts or spending cause you to think less of yourself, meaning self-esteem? Are you worried? Are you ashamed? Are you hiding it? Are you embarrassed? And while there are kind of people who like to joke about shopping addiction by saying, I'm a shopaholic and proud. When the going gets tough, the tough goes shopping. And the other one, I'm going to go engage in some retail therapy. Now, I have a sense of humor, and I'm not against shopping or spending at all, and it ought to be somewhat fun. But we're coming up on the holiday season too, and there's been some research, and I've experienced this personally and professionally, it's what we call the best of times and worst of times for many people. There's a lot of wonderful things about the holiday, but a lot of addictions begin occurring during that time, or if they're in remission, there's a lot of relapses. So we all need to be careful, and shopping is probably one of the biggest ones, but overeating, drug use, alcohol, gambling, stealing, hoarding, affairs, there's a lot of, so whatever we can do to start thinking about the holidays so we can prepare to have a stable, wonderful holiday season. But I remember about a decade ago, I got a flyer in my mail. I was already working with Overshopping, and it was from a local Tony kind of suburb that I'm in Metro Detroit. And it literally said at the top, and it kind of advertised a number of stores in this Tony little town called Birmingham, Michigan, not far from me. It literally said, "Oh, come all ye shopaholics." And I remember just being shocked, but it reminded me how much people don't really understand this or make fun of it or don't realize how many lives it ruins individually and collectively. And I just thought, would I get a flyer from a consortium of local pubs that said, alcoholics, come in, your first drink is free. Pathological gamblers, come on down. We will give you $100 credit. Compulsive overeaters, we've got an all-you-can-eat buffet for you. I haven't seen one since, which is good news, but I don't know if somebody got the memo. I think I contacted the Chamber of Commerce, but I don't know if they ever, registered my complaint. But so we do kind of laugh about this. Here's one too, number 5 for DA. Have you ever given false information in order to obtain credit? And again, that may not be the majority of people, but many people do. They get so desperate that they will commit crimes, like getting a credit card in somebody else's name, or stealing a credit card, or even your own family. Number 6, have you ever made unrealistic promises to your creditors, whoever they are? And that's probably a pretty common one. Number 7, does the pressure of your debts or spending make you careless about the welfare of your family? And even if it's not intentional, you can imagine when we're so stressed out and trying to rob from Peter to pay Paul, people get neglected. We probably yell at them. We might end up getting into legal trouble. And, while we're solely responsible for that, not our families, that can affect our family directly or indirectly. We get fired from a job for, not focusing or being like, a lot of different things can affect the family. And a lot of times, like we've got such tunnel vision, like any kind of person in the throes of an addiction. Others are caught in the crossfire and wounded. Number 8, do you ever fear that your employer, family, or friends will learn about the extent of your total debt or shopping spending problem? Very briefly, because I was first working with primarily stealing behavior, shoplifting, and employee theft, and I could understand from a personal and professional perspective why many of my clients hadn't told many people in their life about it. Sometimes it was unavoidable because they got arrested and had to call somebody, or they've gone through it for a while, they've been in and out of the court system, whatever. But it was really a little bit of a shock how much shame people with a shopping spending addiction had. Because it's perfectly legal, it's greatly encouraged, and everybody shops and spends at least to some degree. But some of the stigma that prevented them was, not only sometimes keeping the debt a secret and not wanting somebody to find out and leave them or be angry at them, but just kind of, they often feel like people will judge them. And frankly, sometimes that happens, rightly or wrongly, or a little of both. Like, they're going to judge me as irresponsible, immature, materialistic, superficial, selfish, crazy. And sometimes that has happened. A lot of times people are feeling that kind of degree of shame, and it's not reality based, but it is something that does happen. Number 9 here. When faced with a difficult financial decision, does the prospect of borrowing give you an inordinate feeling of relief? Now, there's nothing wrong with asking for help, but if you keep going to family or to the banks or to applying for the next credit card, Houston, there might be a problem. So there is relief when I can get more credit on my credit card or open up. But what do you think happens? Instead of using that for a cash advance to pay down the original debt, it tends to kind of be used for more shopping and spending a lot. And now we've got a bigger problem. So it provides momentary relief being given credit, but doesn't usually work out very well unless the person has some recovery or checks and balances or accountability. Number 10, does the pressure of your debt spending cause you to have difficulty sleeping or eating? Yes. Oversleeping, undersleeping, overeating, undereating. Number 11, has the pressures of your debt or spending ever caused you to consider getting drunk or gambling or even stealing? Yes, and often yes. Number 12, have you ever borrowed money without giving adequate consideration to the rate of interest that you are required to pay? Often true. Please, I'll pay any amount of interest. Just give me the money. I'm desperate. And then, that's kind of how you get hooked in that vicious cycle too. Number 13, do you usually expect a negative response when you are subject to a credit investigation? Yes. Number 14, have you ever developed a strict regimen of paying off your debts or reducing your spending only to break it again under pressure or after you've gotten out of debt? Most people, we call that like the yo-yo diet, and people get sober and then they relapse and they lose weight if they're lucky enough, and then they gain it back, stop gambling, start gambling. Same thing with this, so it can become a vicious cycle. And finally, number 15, do you justify your debts or overspending by telling yourself that you're superior to other people, and when you just get your break, whatever that might mean, you will never be in debt again, kind of like wishful fantasy thinking? That's what a lot of gamblers go through too, from what I understand. If I can, I know I'm in debt, but I'm going to hit that jackpot or I'm going to win big, and if that happens, which is rare, it does happen sometimes. 9 times out of 10, they can't resist, and they just keep gambling, and then they lose it. So it's a terrible kind of cycle. There are subtypes of every addict, so to speak. Like there are gambling addicts who love, the one-armed bandits, the slot machines. There are some who like high-stakes poker. There's some who don't go to casinos at all, but they do sports betting. And there are alcoholics who binge drink, and those who have, just a few drinks every day that causes problems. And some like wine, and some like beer, and some are more liquor. So you have with eating disorders, all kinds of patterns, of course. There's interesting. So the main thing is, if you got a shopping spending problem, in one sense, it doesn't matter kind of what pattern, but a few that have been recognized is one, what is called the classic compulsive shopper. You've probably heard the term emotional eating. Well, there's also emotional shopping. And probably we all do it from time to time, which usually isn't a problem. But if it starts to be your go-to for every little thing to soothe your emotions, whether you're stressed, you're bored, you're lonely, you're angry, you're sad, you're tired, whatever, then it's going to get out of whack both with the eating and the shopping. So there is a subset of people who just, they just can't deal with their own feelings or their own situations, so they shop it away. Now, probably everybody who has a shopping or spending problem ends up doing that. But here's the other subtypes or patterns that are very common, and people usually have more than one, including the compulsive shopping spending. Some people even there's a thing like where people can't get to sleep, so they shop. There's also a phenomenon called shopping while drunk, or drunk shopping, where people don't even remember what they bought the following morning. But what I see a lot of, in part because my clients are mostly women, but this is not a gender thing, for image shoppers. So one pattern is having to look the best, having your car look the best, your home look the best, the way your children are dressed. And while I have nothing against any of that to some degree, and we all do live in that kind of culture or society, it can get out of whack, and then you're so driven. And then as you're getting into more problems with your spending and feeling lower self-esteem and arguments typically with your partner, you almost have to keep doing more to pick yourself up and get the latest outfit, and vicious cycle. So image shopping, let's all be aware of that. Nothing wrong with looking good, but hopefully there's healthy limits. Bargain shoppers, that's a common one too. And if I had any shopping problem, that would be me, because I loves me a bargain. And when Groupon and Amazon started to get kind of big a couple decades ago, my wife started to notice packages coming in the mail a little more frequently. And that was me getting bargains. And then the Groupons, I was presenting her with like 5 or 10 Groupons at a time. And she's like, whoa. We haven't even gone out to this restaurant where you get one meal free. Let's slow your roll. And then I kind of had to wake up and go, okay, so that's a big one. And people can justify it because I'm not paying full price. The stuff is cheap. I'm getting a deal. Trophy shoppers, people who look usually for an extended period of time for a particular rare item or a special item, and it takes a lot of time and energy. And then when they finally buy it, whether it's cheap or not, they're happy for about 13 seconds, and then they're on to the next kind of trophy. That's an interesting kind of subtype. Bulimic shopping, I didn't invent the term, or what we also call returnaholic, where people buy and return, whether at the store or whether online through the TV, buy and return, and it gets so chaotic. And every time they try to return something, they end up buying more. So it takes a lot of time, but they'll rationalize it. They'll say, I'm just, buying things, but I'm not keeping them all. But I've had people who became basically almost hoarders because they were buying and spending and returning. So it became very chaotic. There's another one called collector shoppers, people who collect things, but it can be overdone in terms of the time, the energy, the space, or the amount of money, particularly if there's multiple collections. There's codependent shoppers. I love this one, which is a situation where people are actually buying or spending too much on other people for gifts and things like that. And they can rationalize that too by saying, but it's not for me. And then there are people who aren't necessarily buying a lot of material things, but they're overspending on lifestyle. So they're going out to eat too much. They're using DoorDash too often, which adds up. They're going on a fancy vacation. I'm not judging anybody for what kind of vacation or wedding or bar mitzvah or anything, but a lot of times people will, that lifestyle, or they'll buy one big purchase. They'll buy a home they really can't afford, a car they really can't afford. They'll start off their marriage in debt because that was like the wedding of the century, things like that. So there's that. And again, just to wrap up here, most of my clients are not superficial or materialistic people at all. So I've learned a lot. I used to actually have a judgment about people who are really into stuff or looking good. Everyone I've worked with has been like a person of much soul and depth. And when you get into their stories of their lives, there's a lot of interesting things that we go back to in how their family of origin dealt with money. And two things often happen. We're not blaming mom or dad, but many come from a family where they at least perceived they were deprived. Even if their family had money, they heard no a lot. You can't have that, no a lot. Or the alternative, they were spoiled or overindulged and they got everything they wanted. And sometimes mom and dad look at it differently, and then they're really confused. Maybe dad's saying, no, you can't have that. And mom's saying, okay, don't tell your dad we did this, or vice versa. So a lot of secrecy about money and confusion about that, and that can be something to work through. And then finally, the 5 questions we want to look at. What is healthy shopping? We all have to define it for ourselves over time, but some things that are 5 quick questions that you can ask yourself that might slow you down. You might need some therapy or recovery group. Number 1, do I need this? And most people are buying a lot of things they don't need. And then we're not saying you never buy anything you want, but be more need oriented. And that's a fuzzy thing because a lot of people don't know what real need is, or their partner has a different idea. Number 2, can I afford this? We have to revamp that because some people say, well, I'm maxed out, but I can always get another credit card, so I can't afford it. We've got to revamp our thinking about what affordability is. And do we have money for retirement or for an emergency fund? Just do I have space for this? Again, you buy too many things. I know people say I'm not a hoarder. I just don't have a big house. No, you got to deal with what you have. Number 4, okay, I want this. I need this. Okay, but I'm trying to slow down. Number 4, can I wait? Put it in your shopping cart, at least wait a day or 2. You might be thinking differently about it rather than just hitting purchase. Wait, we need more ability to be patient instead of the immediate gratification. And number 5, here's the big one, and then I'll wrap up. What are we really looking for? And most of the time, it isn't material stuff or a fancy vacation, though that's nice. We're looking for love, but maybe we feel there's no way we're going to get it in our marriage from our family, so love, or we're lonely, or we want to be thought well of, or we're blocking out, the trauma that we've experienced. We just want distraction, and the trauma is too much, or the loss is too much. So remember, you can never get enough of what you don't really need, and recovery is an actual way to effectively look at this problem, feel less alone, and find a new way forward. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
All right. Thank you, Terry, so much for your sharing of your knowledge and the things that you've learned over the years. We've got I've written down several questions here, and if you in the audience have questions for Terry, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other. Terry, I'd like to start off with a question here. Tell us a little bit about what got you into this being a passion. Was there a rock bottom for you that made you go, okay, I really need to address some things in this light, and that eventually turned you to counseling?
Well, a couple things, as I said earlier, but part of it was I've always been fascinated by people's relationship with money, and then my own. Although I've not identified myself as having a shopping spending problem ever in my life, but one thing I say to people, and I'm glad I'm remembering it for myself, is just because you're 50 or above and you've never had a particular problem, you never know when a certain kind of addictive problem can start, because many people start addictions like after 50 years old or beyond, of all flavors. So it's a reminder to me. But I was actually kind of an underspender, not totally extreme to a fault, but I had to develop a different relationship with money, where I could feel free to spend and live a little bit. And my wife helped me out a lot with that. I'm not saying she was an overspender, but she helped me kind of realize that, but also I've had friends and family members who've had money problems, which has been, kind of sad and unfortunate. And I never mean to blame anybody for their own problems, because there's a lot of interesting situations. Also, I've seen a trend in our country, in our culture. There was a time, not to get political, and I'm certainly not being partisan, where we had a surplus on our, quote unquote, the national debt, around the year 2000. And some of you have probably read recently, we're $33 trillion in debt. And then I would read articles about all these people filing for bankruptcy or breaking up because of problems with money in their marriages, or, young people, not being able to wait for what they want. So there's a lot of different cultural phenomena that I find, through my reading and watching the news, that this is a real problem. And yet I don't know why it's taking so long to study it and to treat it more seriously and have more help options out there. So when I first started my private practice about 20 years ago, and I originally thought it was just going to be for shoplifting and employee theft behavior, I realized not only from some clients having money problems, but I realized as I began to start to read every book that was out there, and there weren't very many, and watch a few videos, and that this is a problem. And I don't know if I can help, but I'm going to do what I can to learn. I'm interested in this. I see this as a growing field, not just from like a financial or business perspective. I don't care if I'm not that rich. I mean, I'm comfortable. I'm fine. But I really feel like there's just not enough education and help out there, and we don't take this seriously. So that's the main reason.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Terry. I'd like to ask you also about the 12-step group that you founded, C.A.S.A.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that, how people can find that, if that's what they're looking for, and how they can access those meetings.
Right. Okay. So long story short, I had a problem with shoplifting and was living a secret life, and to a lesser degree, some low-level employee theft during my college years from about age 15 to 25, 1980 to 1990. And I have a book out there, my first book, called Something for Nothing: Shoplifting Addiction Recovery. I wasn't bragging about it. I didn't shoplift with anybody. I knew right from wrong. I felt conflicted about it. And it would stop sometimes, like after my first arrest in my senior year of undergraduate college. I was about 21, and I was given a slap on the wrist. And I didn't do that for a while, although I didn't realize I was transferring possible addictions, because then I started to take from a little deli I worked at in a bookstore, who offered a nice employee discount, but somehow I was taking more than I probably should have. And then when my probation was over, very soon after, I was right back out there shoplifting, more on than off. I never thought of it as addiction. Finally, I hit the proverbial bottom in the middle of law school. I did end up going to law school and becoming a lawyer in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was about halfway through a third of the middle of my law school, which was 3 years. It was 1990. I was about 25. And nothing was going well in my life. I'm not going to get into details. And I'm feeling like a total hypocrite because I'm still shoplifting. I'm even working at the law library and taking money as, I'm selling at the front desk these Xerox copy cards for $1, $5, $10, $20, and they had no system of accountability. So I'm a mixed up puppy, and I started to feel suicidal, and that prompted me to finally come clean with my mom. She knew I was struggling about a lot of things, but she had no idea about the stealing. And when I told her about that 10-year history and that it was still kind of ongoing, her jaw hit the floor, like, because I was kind of like, not a perfect child, but I was kind of like the golden child and had good grades and helped out at home and all, I was a real trooper. To her credit, she didn't yell at me. She said, I don't understand this, but let's get you a therapist. And I worked for 9 months from March 1990 to the end of 1990 with the local therapist, a family referral of a very good therapist who helped me. Coincidentally, I was arrested for the second time for shoplifting a week after I got into therapy, but somehow I got through that. And he never worked with anybody with a shoplifting or stealing problem, apparently. And we kind of figured out that, like, kleptomania, which I had heard of, and we looked at it didn't quite seem to fit me. And yet I didn't think of myself as a plain criminal or like just an entirely inherently dishonest person. But he didn't really realize until our very last appointment at the end of 1990, I'd been in therapy weekly for 9 months, where even though I got through the court, I was still shoplifting less. And I was honest with him. I give myself credit for that. And he finally, like at the end of the year, he said, I don't know if I can help you anymore. You're a great kid. I think we understand a lot of the background reasons, the divorce, your anger at your dad, worries about money. You're trying to be the hero. You're putting too much pressure on yourself, And then he really literally said to me, it's like you're addicted to this. And I had this light bulb moment where I never had the little thought bubble of the word shoplifting and addiction in the same thought bubble. And believe me, I was not looking for a convenient excuse to pin it on. I really wanted to understand it. And it was both a beautiful and horrible experience. It was horrible because to some degree, although I'm now a gratefully recovering addict, as I imagine, most or some of you are, but at the time it was like, I don't want to have an addiction. That's not good news. I was kind of looking to kind of be cured, in 9 months. Also, I realized my dad had many addictions and I thought I had none, but I had been learning through therapy up until that point that I had something called codependency, which many of you know about. And it's kind of like an addiction. It isn't officially recognized as one, and that's a whole nother topic. But then it was a beautiful realization that if I don't think I'm a kleptomaniac, but I also don't think I'm just a plain thief, maybe an addiction explains why I was being obsessed with it. And even after getting arrested a second time, why the hell was I still doing it? Also, it ended up being very healing for me to realize, instead of putting myself on a pedestal and looking down at my dad with all his addictions, that maybe it helped me become a little more patient, understanding, and compassionate. And then I had no idea I would make kind of a cottage industry out of helping people, so to speak. I had no master plan, but one step back. So I started the group after going to some other groups. There were no groups for shoplifting or stealing in the early 90s in Metro Detroit, but I went to a few other groups. They took me under their wing temporarily, and they suggested, like, hey, there's got to be more people out there who have this problem. So I took up a little courage, of course, but I started it in September 92. So it's 31 years old. It did take about 3 months before the first person arrived. And then we've been kind of rolling since then. We have 4 local groups in Metro Detroit. We've been meeting by a free conference call for 3.5 years since COVID. We've not yet gone back. And then for my clients I work with, I have a private email group for former and current clients who have problems with stealing, and a separate private email group for former and current clients who have over-shopping, overspending, or cluttering and hoarding issues. And some of my clients have been on both groups. So we do need more help. There are not many groups out there for shoplifting or stealing. I can count, maybe even before COVID, there were maybe only about 5 to 10. And then after COVID, I think a few went under. So there is a need for that. If any of you have that problem or know somebody and you want to contact me, perhaps my information will be there, or Justin will provide it for you, or you can look it up. We can have a private, confidential conversation by email or phone. If you're interested in starting a group, I might be able to help with that.
Good. So, if anybody wants to join the conference call groups that you do right now, is that something that, you're willing to share how they can find that? Or
okay. So our local groups, we're only doing it for local people, many of whom are court ordered. So partly to keep our 4 weeknight groups from having too many people, but also keeping a kind of neighborly feel. Those aren't open to anybody outside the kind of Metro Detroit or Michigan area. But there is on my website, under my menu option, there are a few other national groups that people can call in during the day and evening for this kind of thing. And there might even be one Zoom group. So there are a few options. And if you can't find it on my menu option, please call me or email me and I can direct you to that. But you can search around under my menu under shoplifting. There's a drop-down menu, C.A.S.A support groups. And there's a list on the first page that's kind of out of date of all the groups that we're tentatively meeting in person across the country. That group has not yet been updated, and I don't think many are meeting face-to-face. But then on the second page, it has the phone groups that I don't run. I didn't found them. I don't facilitate them. I've attended them from time to time, not lately, but they're decent groups. You can check those out, and they're free.
Okay, perfect. So I will make sure that in the show notes, there's options where people can find that, your website, the links there. And if anybody out there wants to reach out and contact Terry, you can email me at rico12pod@gmail.com, and I'll get you connected with him that way. All right, perfect. I've got another question here for you. With these addictions, with these compulsions that you have been talking about here today, often those would be called something like a process addiction or a process obsession compulsion. What do you see as similarities and what do you see as differences between the compulsion ones and like the substance ones?
Right. Well, yes. So probably most people are familiar with that term. A process addiction, another way to put it, would be like a behavioral addiction. Okay. So if we're ingesting or consuming or putting into our bodies in some way, drugs, could be street drugs, could be pharmaceutical drugs, alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, sugar, carbs. I mean, that's why they call it the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. Of course, there's various different kinds of behaviors with anything, even a drug or food. There's binging, there's chronically compulsive drinking or eating. There's, binging and purging, how things. But there are, these other kind of behaviors out there: gambling, sex addiction, love addiction, codependency, religious addiction. Hoarding is not classified as an addiction, but Clutter Anonymous, I think, has been around since the 70s, and I think that can be treated very similarly to an addiction. But anyway, I mean, obviously, when you're dealing with eating disorders and drugs, they can be life-threatening. People can die from drug overdoses and alcohol overdose and bulimia and anorexia and so those are pretty serious, and they often need more, whether it's detox or inpatient treatment. Not always, but often they're very serious things where a medical doctor often needs to be involved. Now gambling, now all addictions can lead to suicide or homicide. And gambling has the highest, if it's still true, the highest rate of suicide per capita. So that's a huge thing. So there is a difference. And even though I worked in the drug and alcohol field for 7 years until 2004, and I really enjoyed that, if somebody came to me today with a drug or alcohol, I just because it's possibly life-threatening, and if they got to get sober, it's going to be hard to work with me on anything else. I send them straight to some kind of treatment center. Plus, I haven't kept up on all the trends with different kinds of medications that they're using to curb urges, particularly for opioid or opiate addictions. But so I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but they're similar in a sense. But they are a little bit different because we're not necessarily putting something in our body. But they have done studies where, they give like some college students like, a pitcher of beer that has no alcohol in it, and they observe them and they're actually acting drunk. I mean, it's not even the near beer, 0.05%. I mean, and then they do studies that show that thinking about drinking, even before you've ingested, or thinking about drugging, the brain is already changing. Same thing with gambling. And then they've had people, ingest under, supervised settings, alcohol and or certain drugs, and they watch their brain chemistry on a screen. And it's very similar to somebody who's gambling, who's shopping. So there's more similarities than there are differences. And I'll say one more thing, and I don't think you're surprised to hear this, Justin. I don't know about the people online. But in the old days, whatever those were, well, actually, even when I was working in the drug and alcohol field, it was kind of rare that somebody only had just an alcohol problem or a drug problem. Often there was both, or they might have another behavioral problem like gambling. And though my clients will come to me typically for 1, 2, or all 3 of the specialties that I'm developing, so a stealing problem, a shopping spending problem, or a hoarding problem, some of they just have one of those 3, sometimes 2. But it's not uncommon for some to say, I've been sober from alcohol for about 10 years. I don't know if I transferred addictions or traded Peter for Paul or Peggy for Pam, and that is a very common phenomenon, right? I'm sure we've been through those personally or know people where so it's very rare that, so a lot of times I'm dealing with people who've had an eating disorder and or an alcohol or drug problem and a process addiction. So a lot of times they're going together either at the same time or they're switching one for the other. And, so I don't know if I answered your question directly, if that was your question, Justin, but they're not a hell of a lot different except for a few factors. And I'm certainly open to hearing how people feel they might be different, because I do know some people who still think like process addictions, behavioral addictions, no, that's not either a real thing or we have to kind of subcategorize it because you're not putting something into your system that then triggers our feel-good chemicals to be released. But frankly, behaviors do that too. And, so it isn't a whole lot of different. And people go through withdrawal. And there are inpatient programs for sex addiction, not many that I'm aware of, but there are. Gambling addiction. I don't yet know of any hoarding. There's a treatment program in the Boston area that was created over the last 10 years by a couple of the pioneers in hoarding disorder. I'll stop there in case we have a few other questions. But
I
it's a great
gotcha.
question. It's a great question, though.
Yeah, it's one that I am very curious about and learning I can't say I'm learning a lot about. I'm
Yeah.
experiencing a lot about. So, yeah, that's good. So, thank you so much. Before we wrap this up, I have one more question for you. But if the audience has another question, please send that in the Q&A link. But the question I have for you has to do with the you mentioned this phrase. You said image shopping.
Sure.
And for me, I have been very concerned about my image, especially through active addiction. I wanted to portray something that I had. Now, my addiction didn't necessarily include spending or shopping but I wanted to put this perfect image out there for people to understand.
Yeah.
How do you think well, tell me about that. Tell me why I do that and why that's so important for me to manage that image.
Okay. Well, I can't say I'm an expert at the subset of, self-image or whatever, but it's fair to say, probably like the bell curve, which everybody knows, there's probably a small subset of people on one end of the spectrum who don't care anything about their image. And I like to joke as I'm getting a little older that I still care about my image, but one of the joys of aging might be for some people that you become comfortable in your own skin and you don't care so much about what people think about you or how much you even think about yourself, or maybe you feel better about yourself not worrying about what and then on the other end of the spectrum, you have some people who are so really hyper focused on their image. And this can happen with body dysmorphia, where people or about being thin, living in this thin cult, so there's a lot of different factors that can be about our physical appearance, about how much money we have, what our lifestyle is, whether we're in a good relationship with a significant other, what our kids, so I don't think it's abnormal to care about what other people think, but certainly it can be a problem in different ways. And there probably has to be a balance because if we're so driven to either be perfect or never make a mistake or not have a hair out of a place, even if you didn't develop an addiction, let's say, that's a hard way to go. It's a lot of pressure on ourselves. And even when we want to kind of stop doing that, it can be very hard. There may be some OCD tendencies in that. I'm not an expert on OCD, and people throw the term around, but from my research, it really probably only affects in its kind of real form or, purest form or most significant form, 2.5% of the population. But people throw that around a lot. But it can be, generally speaking, however we got it, like how we got so obsessed about our image. It is curious to look back in our lives and think about that. Like, and I hear a lot of stories from my female clients where, their weight was attended to by comments, or they felt they had to keep up, to be liked or to be popular or to be welcomed. And then other, you have to be confident, or you have to at least portray you're confident, or you have to get good grades, or you got to get in the best college. There's all kinds of messages were being given either by our family or the culture. And everybody is familiar with the phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. One of my favorite lines to say is, there was a time that the Joneses meant perhaps our neighbors, our friends, the kids at school, our family members. Now it really literally is keeping up with the Kardashians, because we are being bombarded with different imagery and information about what the American dream is, or how we should look, or how we should be. And we should be ultra wealthy and ultra pretty and ultra popular and have a social media account that's getting 1 million likes. So it's a brave new world. And even if you don't think you're susceptible to that kind of direct and indirect messaging, it's probably getting in somewhere in each of our brains. Like, and that's why I love recovery so much. And we're all imperfect people, even in recovery. And even somebody with 30 years clean, probably has some issues, right? But you do find that's one of the things, that you can be vulnerable, you can be yourself, you can be honest about your faults and the things that you're ashamed about, and actually be welcomed and actually affirmed for letting us know that you're not perfect. And then actually, not that perfect is the goal, but you become more yourself with your warts and wounds. And then if you can relax a little and know that all people have problems of different, I'm part of the human family, and a lot of people have addictions, or most are wonderful people. So recovery is such a wonderful thing in all its different shapes and forms. And, but people can still have that driving them to be the perfect sponsor, the perfect AA attendee. It runs deep. And there might be some therapy. There might be a good book. You could Google to see if there's some videos on it that ring a bell and help. But I love that you brought that up. So a lot of people are really, that's part of the problem. We have to kind of gradually unhook from, whatever we think our faults are and whatever we think, looking good. And it's tough. It's not easy because a lot of other people will judge us.
Thank you so much, Terry. I really appreciate that. Good answer, good insights. I appreciate that. Thank you for being a part of this RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting. Those of you out in the audience, if you would like to get in contact with Terry or would like to ask a question there, you can either send an email to me at rico12pod@gmail.com. I'll get you connected with Terry. You can also join our WhatsApp community by sending an email to that same email address. Join in our community there, ask questions that may come up, answer other people's questions that may come up. And what we'd like to do now is invite you to go and rate and review RICO 12 in Apple Podcasts if you have not already done so. It's a great way to help us get this message out to even more people who are seeking recovery, seeking experience, strength, and hope. It's a good thing. Next week, we look forward to hearing from Maureen N., a first-time RICO 12 speaker whose topic will be creativity in recovery. I'm excited to hear from Maureen. So, and everybody else, don't miss any of the other RICO 12 resources that'll be released over the next week. We have new podcasts come out every Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then we have some rotating podcasts that come out regularly. So go check out all the other RICO 12 resources. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with an adapted prayer that Terry wrote. Go ahead, Terry. Let's head out with this prayer.
And just 30 seconds before I get to the prayer that I created actually for this podcast, so you might not find it anywhere, I'll just remind everybody, and it's kind of within the prayer, that healthy shopping and spending likely is being more thoughtful than impulsive, more open and honest than secretive. Not that people have to know all of your business about what you buy, but if you're hiding, lying, or something, it's probably not healthy. More necessity-based than just want-based. Affordable versus unaffordable, which we need to kind of get our mind around, and more level-headed rather than emotional. Now, we're not robots, so we're not going to just be kind of neutral and have no emotion, earthling, but just watch it, particularly if you tend to overshop when you're stressed, alone, things like that, and to try to kind of be in a more level-headed place. So here's our closing recovery prayer that is specifically tailored. It was a nice little exercise that Justin gave me to maybe create a prayer. So here's one that I think spoke to me personally and might speak to you. God, grant us the serenity to accept my current and or ongoing financial dysfunction and helplessness. Grant me the courage to seek, find, and engage in a spiritual financial program that helps restore me to sane thinking, feeling, choices, and actions in my relationship to money and spending. And grant me the wisdom to know when less is more, that abundance or even enoughness is a state of mind, not the state of my bank account, and that we can never get enough of what we don't really need. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Terry. Everybody keep coming back. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me, your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone, 'cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place, and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me, your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone, 'cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be. I saw stars fall from above, I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low, but now I know that I just can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.